Starting off our list today, we have Mir. While that may sound like the name of some kind of cute cartoon character, it's actually the name of a decommissioned, deorbited space station that operated in low Earth orbit from 1986 to 2001, originally by the Soviet Union and later by Russia. At the time of its launch, Mir was the largest artificial satellite in orbit, succeeded by the International Space Station, which was launched in 1998 and is still in operation to this day. Mir was designed to be a long-term research station, and it was. It held the record for the longest single human spaceflight at 3,644 lonely days until that record was again surpassed by an astronaut aboard the ISS. The Mir station was launched in an effort to improve the human understanding of the difficulties one might face while attempting to establish a permanent presence in space. Of course, there is no way NASA would go anywhere near this thing during its years of operation because it would most certainly lead to extreme conflict between the United States and Russia. On March 23rd of 2001, the Mir was brought out of orbit and back into our atmosphere, and it was destroyed completely upon re-entry.
The first beings to fly up into space weren't human. In the early years of the space race, the Albert Project was an American initiative that aimed to study the effects of space travel on living organisms. This involved sending a bunch of animals like monkeys, mice, fruit flies on suborbital flights to study what would happen to their bodies during spaceflight. The project was named after a monkey named Albert, and then every monkey thereafter they tried to send up to space also received the name Albert as well, which led to the project unofficially being named the Albert Project. Albert II became the first primate to reach space on June 4th, 1949, but he died on re-entry. The project was pretty cruel, as most of these animals never made it home alive, but they played a big role in the advancement of spacecraft technology. But the thing is, a bunch of these crafts that never made it back home are said to be quietly floating around up there, with their animal occupants still inside. Basically, forever trapped in space coffins. Pretty creepy.
Next up, we have the Salyut program, a series of Soviet space stations, 7 to be exact, launched between the years of 1971 and 1982, with Salyut 1 being the world's first ever space station to be launched into orbit. With a crew of 3 Russian astronauts, the station set a then record with a 24-day-long manned mission to space. Unfortunately, however, the crew never made it home, as they were all killed due to the sudden depressurization of their spacecraft, the Soyuz 11, designed to shuttle the astronauts home shortly before their re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Salyut 2 through 7 were launched in the years that followed, with number 6 and 7 eventually becoming the main research stations of the Soviets during the time period. Out of the total 1,697 days in which the stations were occupied, 6 and 7 accounted for 1,499. Safe to say that is the majority. It's just math. These two stations were also the first to utilize 2 docking ports, which allowed for both shuttle spacecrafts and Progress spacecrafts used to resupply the station to be docked at the same time, allowing for the first ever instance of continuous occupation of a space station. That rhymes. In 1986, the Salyut program ended and all stations were decommissioned and destroyed, either on purpose or accidentally.
Amongst all the satellites orbiting around Earth, could one of them be of extraterrestrial origin? Well, some people think there is one, an object that has been referred to as the Black Knight satellite. The legend of the Black Knight satellite really started gaining traction in 1954 when newspapers reported that an unknown object was detected in Earth's orbit. At the time, both the United States and the Soviet Union were in the early stages of their space programs, and any unidentified object in space drew a lot of attention. I suppose that's still the case today, but in the 60s, photographs taken by a polar orbiting satellite showed a strange dark object. These images added to the mystery and were quickly linked to the idea of the Black Knight satellite. And over the years, more sightings and unexplained signals picked up by radio operators were also attributed to the Black Knight satellite conspiracy. The theory is that the Black Knight has been orbiting Earth for thousands of years, placed there by some advanced alien civilization. Some claim that it has been transmitting signals to Earth, and that these signals have been intercepted and analyzed by space agencies, including NASA, who is covering up the presence of the Black Knight to avoid public panic and to control information about extraterrestrial technology. NASA's official explanation is that the object is just a piece of space debris, but who's to say?
Next up, we have Skylab, an American space station, America's first space station actually, which was sent into orbit on May 14th of 1973. It was occupied until July of 1979, and it was operated by 4 separate crews: Skylab 1, 2, 3, and 4. Prior to the station's launch, 3 astronauts underwent simulation missions that mimicked the conditions they would face while in orbit. When the station was launched, it was inhabited by 3 astronauts and 2 garden spiders who were purposefully launched with the ship into low orbit so that their behaviors could be studied. At one point in time, NASA actually considered sending wine up to the space station, but they eventually changed their minds after receiving backlash from the public. Lame public. When the spacecraft was decommissioned in 1970, it was brought out of orbit and it disintegrated upon re-entry into the atmosphere, scattering debris across both the Indian Ocean and Western Australia, who went on to send NASA a fine of $400 for littering.
The Cosmos 557 was a bit of an embarrassment for the Russian space program. It launched on May 11, 1973. The goal was to send a space station into orbit, similar to what the United States was doing with its Skylab program. Cosmos 557 was supposed to become a part of the Salyut series of space stations, which were used for scientific experiments and to test long-term human stays in space, but shortly after launch, the space station experienced some technical problems. There were issues with its flight control system, which meant it couldn't maintain its proper orbit and quickly lost altitude. Within a week, it fell back into Earth's atmosphere and burned up. The craft had been picked up on Western radar though, but not wanting anyone to know that this was a failure of their Salyut program, they disguised the launch, calling it the Cosmos 557. Didn't come out until much later that it was actually part of the Salyut program.
Next up, we have the Tiangong 1, China's very first prototype space station that orbited Earth from 2011 to 2018, and it was used as a crew laboratory as well as an experimental test bed to demonstrate orbital maneuvers and docking capabilities. When the space station was launched on September 19th of 2011, it was unmanned. It wasn't until November of that same year that astronauts first stepped foot on the station outside of Earth's atmosphere. In June of 2012, the original crew of the Tiangong was replaced with another, and in June of 2013, a new crew arrived that included China's very first female astronauts, Liu Yang and Wang Yaping. In total, the space station was manned for a span of 2 years. On March 21st of 2016, China announced that the Tiangong 1 had officially ended its service, and in September of 2016, they admitted that they had actually lost control of the station altogether. And on April 2nd of 2018, the Tiangong underwent an uncontrollable re-entry into Earth's atmosphere, and it disintegrated over the southern Pacific Ocean.
And next came the Tiangong 2. The Tiangong 2 was China's second space station, launched on September 15th of 2016. Tiangong 2 is designed to accommodate 2 astronauts for missions lasting up to 30 days. The station was equipped with life support systems, scientific instruments, and equipment for conducting experiments in microgravity. The first and only manned mission to Tiangong 2, Shenzhou 11, launched on October of 2016. 2 astronauts, Jing Jiangping and Cheng Dong, lived on the space station for 30 days. They did a number of experiments like studying the effects of space on the human body, they grew plants, tested new technology for future space missions. After the mission, Tiangong 2 continued to operate for several months, performing additional experiments and serving as a platform for testing new space technology. In July of 2019, China deorbited Tiangong 2, re-entering Earth's atmosphere and burning up over the South Pacific.
Next up, we have the Almaz, yet another Soviet-Russian space program. But what sets this particular space program apart is the fact that it was a super-secret Soviet military space program that began in the early 1960s. 3 crewed military reconnaissance space stations were launched as part of the program, with the first being sent into orbit in 1973 and the last in 1976. Here's the thing. Remember how I told you that there were 7 7 Salyut space stations? Well, I lied. Kind of, because 3 of those were actually Almaz space stations disguised as research stations. Fancy that. Salyuts 2, 3, and 5 were actually used for military purposes. Well, Salyuts 3 and 5 were because Salyuts 2, aka Almaz 1, failed pretty shortly after achieving orbit. But Salyuts 3 and 5, aka Almaz 2 and 3, conducted relatively successful crew testing. That is, until 1987. It was deemed by the Soviet Ministry of Defense that the time and resources being consumed by the station far outweighed the benefits of the mission. Again, NASA would not go near these because that would mean international conflict. The space stations were decommissioned and the program was abandoned.
So what's kept NASA away from the moon for such a long time? Well, a mysterious hidden facility operated not by humans, but by extraterrestrial beings, of course. Now, there are people who really think this is a thing, like the notorious conspiracy theorist David Icke, for example. Before we all roll our eyes and dismiss it entirely, though, let's just entertain this for a moment, because that's what we're here to do, after all. The universe is vast, it's full of mysteries, so who's to say what might actually be out there? Have there been photos of some abandoned alien base on the moon, or any statement of one existing? No, but hey, absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence, right? Maybe this supposed lunar base is just really good at staying hidden, camouflaged. Maybe it's tucked away in some remote crater, or NASA just didn't know what to make of it, and it's being kept a secret. But of course, it's worth mentioning that extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. And so far, the evidence for a secret alien lunar base is about as thin as the atmosphere of the moon. But hey, who knows? Stranger things have happened, right?
So if we go back to the reason for water on Earth and take a moment to seriously consider the fact that the organic material brought to Earth by the same asteroids that brought us water have had 3.8 billion years to evolve, I'm gonna go ahead and say that it's pretty likely that it did. And it evolved into something NASA has kept us in the complete dark about. There have been rumors going around that during the 2022 Orpheus expedition, in which a NASA submersible traveled down into the uncharted depths of our oceans, they found something that they don't want us to know about. I mean, makes sense. It's not like this would be the first time that NASA has tried to keep something from the public. The submersible was deployed to explore the Hadal Zone, which is some 6,000 to 11,000 meters below sea level, and it includes the Mariana Trench. In fact, the Mariana Trench is just one of 30 subduction zones, or trench zones in simpler terms, that make up the Hadal. During NASA's 2022 mission, while exploring the depths under the guise of getting a better understanding of how to explore the moon's oceans, it is believed that they stumbled across something massive and never seen before. Underwater megafauna, massive animals, which was actually confirmed by an astronaut by the name of Garrett Reisman, who claims to have seen the eye of one of the creatures, and he described it as being as big as a flying saucer. Interesting analogy from a NASA astronaut.
Alright, expanding on Hannah's point a bit, some stories have been floating around about NASA coming across disturbing creatures deep in the ocean's depths. NASA has taken to exploring some of the deepest waters on Earth, the idea being that if they can learn more about the deep sea right here at home, they'll have a better understanding of what could be in deep sea environments on other planets. They also get a chance to test equipment in a similar environment to space. Now, NASA hasn't come out and said this on their own, but there have been some anonymous whistleblowers posting about experiences they've had on dives, with stories about running into dangerous creatures while on these deep sea explorations. Intelligent creatures resembling humanoid cephalopods who seem to intentionally sabotage equipment. Now, are these stories real, or are they just some internet fun? Well, about 80% of the ocean is unexplored, and seeing as it takes up about 70% of the planet overall, hey, I could see there being something down there other than thumbfish.
At our halfway point today, we have an underwater volcano threatening to split the Earth open. Light stuff, you know? While generally underwater volcanoes provide hydrogen, sulfide, and other minerals to deep sea life, allowing thriving ecosystems to form at unforgivable depths, one volcano in particular, located just off of the coast of Tonga, seems to be kind of doing the opposite. On January 15th of 2022, big year, the volcano exploded with a force equal to 15 million tons of TNT. The eruption was among the most powerful ever recorded, and it sent water vapor 83 miles up into the stratosphere, causing temporary rises to temperatures in the surrounding area. Not only that, but the eruption reshaped the sea floor. The rim around the volcano had been replaced by a cavern that travels down 850 meters into the Earth's crust. Hopefully it doesn't get any deeper, because if it does, kind of like your ex, we're gonna have some serious issues.
There's some pretty intriguing stories about possible alien bases underwater as well. Take the Solomon Islands, for example. There have been stories for hundreds of years about strange objects hovering above the islands and then descending down into the waters below. Locals on these islands also have stories about terrifying creatures stalking the forests, coming out of intricate cave systems underground, and this is just one example. There are said to be alien bases deep under the Alaska ice. Strange UFO-type objects have been spotted maneuvering through waters across the globe. We have a whole video on it. Top 10 mysterious UFOs discovered underwater. Check it out. So perhaps NASA already knows about alien life that's taken up residency here on Earth. Maybe the deep sea is their domain. I ain't saying this is what I believe. By the way, I'm just throwing some ideas at you.
Next on our list, we have NASA's discovery of a city of lights found in the middle of the ocean, in an area with no land or electricity. In 2012, a map of the Earth at night was published by the Earth Observatory in collaboration with NASA and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Everything seemed relatively normal except for one area off the coast of Argentina. You guessed it, a city of lights was shown on the map in a shape that almost resembles an arrowhead, or maybe like the Eiffel Tower. Anyways, it was weird, especially considering the fact that in the area in which the lights are shown, like I said, there's no land. I am repeating myself a lot today. NASA claimed that the lights were a result of fishing boats in the area, but I think it's pretty obvious that NASA is not to be trusted, as they do seem to have a pretty extensive history of secret keeping going on. Plus, the only images ever released of the area were those taken by a satellite at night. I have a feeling something else is going on, but let me know what you think. Do you believe the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, who I have not one, not two, but 3 videos on exposing leaked information they wanted to keep secret? I don't.
So it's not just undiscovered intelligent life forms deep sea divers have to worry about. It's all the primitive creatures as well, some known and some less known. Sure, there are wild stories about humanoid cephalopods attacking researchers down below, or alien bases down there, but while those stories are fun, there is the actual very real possibility of running into something big that could pose a threat to the safety of the crew. Luckily, great whites don't really swim all that deep down, but there's other stuff going on down there. Giant squids are real, and who knows what else could be lurking down there. In the words of Qui-Gon Jinn, there's always a bigger fish. Wise words. You could have giant sea serpents, giant man-eating deep-sea piranhas that can see in the dark. Point is, space is dangerous, sure, but at least you don't have sentient life forms floating around the spacecraft on a constant basis.
And finally, we have the fact that in 2011, 87 World War II explosives made their way out of the ocean and on to Calshot Beach in England, surprising and terrifying locals and tourists alike. Although I'm not sure why you'd want a vacation on the beaches of England. Isn't the whole country's thing being really rainy? Anyways, the many explosive devices were managed by a 5-man bomb squad, which seems a little too relaxed if you ask me. 5 men, 87 bombs. Besides the point, an exclusion zone of 1,000 meters was set up around Calshot Beach to ensure the safety of civilians, while the devices were stacked 300 meters offshore during low tide. When high tide came, they were detonated. The bomb squad continued to comb the beach, the waters, the shores, and a little bit deeper, but luckily, I think no more were found. I think because if they weren't found and they're still there, that's pretty dangerous. If you think that's bad, allow me to remind you that to date, the United States alone has reported, keyword reported, 6 missing nuclear bombs that were lost to the ocean. NASA knows this. I mean, it's public information, so obviously, but I'm betting they probably know the real number too. So I guess it makes sense that they are doing their best to avoid the ocean and to get the heck off this planet as a whole. I mean, if you're gonna die by radiation, might as well do it with a good view of the cosmos, right?
Finally though, what about all the mysterious threats in the deep sea? Things that we just can't quite explain. All the triangles referring to strange sections of water where odd stuff seems to happen all the time. The Bermuda Triangle is of course the most well known, but there are others like the Lake Michigan Triangle, for example. Not that NASA would be exploring Lake Michigan. Places where disappearances seem to happen. Planes will disappear while flying overhead. Ships seem to have accidents or just vanish altogether. Some blame it on treacherous weather. Others think there could be some kind of strange electromagnetic interference in these areas that messes with equipment. These are just theories, of course, but there are so many mysterious incidents in the Bermuda Triangle alone. The disappearance of Flight 19 in 1945, the disappearances of the USS Cyclops in 1918. In 1948, Flight DC-3 went missing, never to be seen again. The Witchcraft vessel in 1967, the list goes on and on. The ocean is vast, mysterious, and dangerous. Most of it is still unexplored, yes, and it's not hard to see. Here's something you gotta think about when exploring the deep sea: earthquakes and tsunamis. Getting caught up in a natural disaster while deep underwater is incredibly dangerous. Astronauts have a lot to worry about, but earthquakes aren't one of them. You don't gotta worry about the Earth's crust shifting when you're not on Earth. Seismic activity beneath the ocean doesn't just trigger destruction on land, it also triggers massive waves, which can of course cause serious problems out at sea. First, you've got underwater earthquakes, giant shudders that happen deep beneath the ocean's surface when tectonic plates shift and grind against each other. We're talking about seismic waves that can shake the ocean floor like a rag doll. So, if you're diving or exploring the deep sea when one of these earthquakes hits, not good. You'd be tossed around with no control over where you're going or what's gonna happen next. And these underwater earthquakes can trigger tsunamis, massive walls of water traveling at high speed, swallowing up everything in their path. Ships, submarines, entire cities along coastlines. Tsunamis are a nightmare scenario for researchers out at sea. Imagine a tsunami barreling towards you from miles away, and by the time you realize what's happening, it's too late. You're caught in this storm of swirling water and debris with no way out, and even if you manage to escape the immediate danger, the aftermath of an underwater earthquake can be just as deadly. The seabed can shift and change in an instant, creating underwater landslides and whirlpools. Now let's talk more about landslides though. These can also be brought on by methane hydrate deposits. Methane hydrate deposits are basically chunks of ice that trap methane gas inside of them. These deposits are stable under high pressure and low temperatures, but when these conditions change, like if the ocean, say, is warming up or if the pressure drops, the methane hydrates can break down and release the methane gas. There are tons of these deposits sitting under the seabed, just waiting to be disturbed, and if that happens, the methane gas shoots up to the surface like a rocket, creating massive bubbles that can swallow up ships and cause explosions. And as I mentioned, there's the landslide part. Methane hydrate deposits can help stabilize the seafloor, so when they break down, it can lead to underwater landslides. These landslides can be massive, a bit like underwater avalanches. Another one of the many dangers of the sea: rogue waves, aka freak waves, killer waves, or monster waves, and they live up to their name. These are massive waves that can appear without warning, so pretty big threats to ships. You could be cruising along and enjoying the salty breeze when out of nowhere a massive wall of water, taller than a 10-story building, comes crashing down on you. They can appear seemingly out of nowhere in the middle of calm seas, and I wasn't exaggerating before. They can be huge. We're talking over 100 feet tall sometimes, which is insane. That's like a skyscraper just suddenly rising up from the ocean. What makes them so scary though is that unpredictability. They don't follow the usual patterns of waves, so sailors can't really prepare for them, at least not entirely. In one moment, you could be sailing smooth, and the next, you're facing towering walls of water that could easily capsize even large ships. And scientists still don't fully understand what causes rogue waves. One of the most dangerous sections of Earth's waters is the Sargasso Sea. The Sargasso Sea is like this floating jungle in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but instead of trees, it's made of a unique type of seaweed called sargassum. This seaweed forms thick mats that can stretch for miles, and it creates this tangled maze. It's a bit eerie. It's kind of like a big floating desert. There's not much else around it except for the seaweed, and that sounds kind of peaceful, but for sailors, it's a different story. Navigating through all that sargassum is actually proven to be pretty dangerous. The Sargasso Sea has a very dark reputation. It's kinda known for swallowing up ships, and over the centuries there have been all these tales of sailors getting trapped in the area, the ships unable to move as they're slowly engulfed by the seaweed. Sounds awful. Underwater caves. Lots of divers have died exploring them. They're labyrinths beneath the surface of the ocean, and sure, they're exciting places to explore. They can be beautiful, but they're also packed with dangers. First off, navigating through an underwater cave is like trying to find your way through a pitch black maze. There are tunnels and chambers crisscrossing in all directions, and if you're not careful, it's easy to get lost. Imagine swimming deeper and deeper into the darkness with no idea which way is up or down. Then you have the risk of getting trapped. Some caves have narrow passages that can squeeze you in, and if you're not careful, you could find yourself wedged with no way out. Another danger of the deep sea are blue holes. These are basically underwater sinkholes, and they can be deceivingly beautiful because they're also incredibly dangerous. Giant gaping chasms in the ocean floor plunging down into the depths. You can see them from the sky. They're often darker blue in color, contrasting with the surrounding water, and they're dark because of how deep they are, for one, and sunlight can't reach the bottom. These holes vary in size and depth. Some extend several hundred feet below the ocean surface. The scariest thing about blue holes is that a lot of them are uncharted territory. Unlike on land, where we have maps and signs to help guide us, most blue holes are unexplored. You never know what you might encounter down there. Who knows what could be living in these areas, for one, but aside from that, there could be dangerous currents, and things do live in some of these blue holes. The Great Blue Hole off the coast of Belize, for example, has been explored, and there are tons of different shark species living down there. So these aren't places you can just go for a casual dive. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, there are these eerie chimneys called black smokers. These are hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor that emit superheated water, which is rich in minerals. But the extreme temperatures and the toxic chemicals can make these areas incredibly dangerous. They're a bit like underwater volcanoes, but instead of spewing lava, they belch out super hot water loaded with minerals. They're found near the edges of tectonic plates, where the Earth's crust is pulling apart, and when cold seawater seeps down into the cracks and meets hot magma below, it gets heated up and then shoots back out of the seafloor in these towering columns of scalding water. The water coming out can be hotter than boiling. We're talking temperatures that would cook you alive. And if that's not scary enough, they're also chock full of toxic chemicals like hydrogen sulfide, which can knock you out cold with just one whiff. Not that you'd really be swimming around down there anyway, to be fair, but still. So the conditions in these areas are pretty extreme, but there is actually life that can survive around black smokers, like tube worms, shrimp. There's a whole ecosystem down there that's adapted to thrive in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth, which is pretty cool. Drowning is said to be one of the worst ways to go, and one easy way to drown, just get caught in a giant swirling vortex of water, a whirlpool. These are kind of like the black holes of the ocean, less mysterious of course, but incredibly deadly. And unlike black holes, which are way too far away from us to cause any harm, even for astronauts, whirlpools are everywhere. One of the most infamous whirlpools is called the Moskstraumen off the coast of Norway. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Probably not. Its currents are strong enough though to suck down ships, which can be torn apart like paper. Whirlpools can be massive, stretching for miles across, across, so if you happen to stumble on one while sailing or swimming, Eesh. That's all I'm going to say is just eesh. And whirlpools can be unpredictable. They can form out of nowhere with no warning signs to let you know they're coming. So even if you're the most experienced sailor or swimmer, at the end of the day, we're all still at the mercy of Mother Nature. For all the terrifying creatures that are known to exist, there are also the mysterious ones, creatures that science hasn't documented, but people have claimed to see, and as intriguing as that is, it's just another one of the many reasons the deep sea is such a dangerous place. There are tons of creatures we could talk about. Let's take a creature that doesn't get talked about a whole lot though, a creature that's been dubbed the Moa Moa. The first documented sighting of the Moa Moa was on June 8th of 1890 on Great Sandy Island in Western Australia by a school teacher named Selina Lovell and a small group of her students. The creature was reported to be this huge monster turtle fish thing measuring about 30 feet in length. The creature was described as having a domed shaped body, almost like a turtle shell, about 8 feet across by 5 feet high, with an elongated neck and a 12-foot long tail. The creature's rounded jaws measured what looked to be about 18 inches. The head and tail almost looked like they belonged to two different animals. Lovell didn't get a good glimpse of the creature's feet, but locals have described the Moa Moa having almost alligator-like feet. Lovell watched the creature for half an hour from only about 5 feet away. Afterward, the Moa Moa turned towards the sea, lifting its body and tail above the water, tossing fish into the air, and then swam back down into the deeper water. And finally, I just gotta mention ghosts. Now, I know that sounds a bit silly. Most astronauts and scientists aren't really all that concerned about ghosts, but I mean, just think of all the ships that have sank or gone missing entirely, all the planes that have gone down and sank to the bottom of the water never to be seen again, all the battles that have taken place out at sea. Unlike the black void of space surrounding us here on Earth, our planet's waters are full of life, but also full of death. There are so many immediate dangers, so much unexplored territory. It's no wonder there are so many tales of ghost ships sailing aimlessly across the sea, or tortured spirits rising from the water to drag unsuspecting sailors into the depths. There could be tons of life out there in space and plenty of dangers we can't even fathom. But until we're able to venture out far enough, it seems like taking a trip to the moon may be a safer one than venturing down into the deepest, darkest depths of our very own planet.
Starting off our list today, we have the absolutely crazy amount of shipwrecks that have occurred in the Gulf of Mexico. In 2018, a report released by Ocean Explorer revealed that oil and gas companies had discovered an outstanding 600 shipwrecks and possible shipwrecks in the Gulf of Mexico while surveying the area at depths of up to 2,316 meters or 9,800 feet. 33 of these ships have been visually confirmed by either divers or remotely operated vehicles as historic vessels. And although only 600 shipwrecks and possible shipwrecks have been discovered by these companies to date, it is estimated that over 4,000 shipwrecks reside on the ocean floor of the Gulf of Mexico, sitting anywhere from the nearshore shallows all the way out to the deepest abyss of the Gulf. But that's not even the weirdest part. While attempting to explore a particular shipwreck, teams experienced submarine malfunctions, failed video monitors, sonar breaking, haywire hydraulics, and self-destructing rovers, which of course begs the question, are some of these shipwrecks possibly cursed, or maybe they contain levels of radiation that affect these machines, or is there some kind of electromagnetic phenomenon going on in these waters that we just haven't discovered yet? Next up, we have the fact that the bottom of the Pacific Ocean is leaking, which sounds terrifying, probably because it is. In April of last year, 2023, scientists discovered that a leak at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean is not spewing water, as they once assumed back in 2015, but rather it is leaking tectonic lubricant with temperatures ranging between 300 and 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The leak sits directly on top of the 600-mile-long Cascadia subduction zone fault, which sits approximately 15 to 20 20 kilometers or 50 to 65,000 feet below sea level. So why is this absolutely terrifying? Well, scientists believe that this leak could cause one of the strongest earthquakes the US and the world has ever seen, with a magnitude of 9.0, which is just 0.5 less than the largest magnitude earthquake to occur in recorded history. I don't know about you guys, but to me that sounds like a pretty good reason to get the heck out of the ocean. Next up on our list today, we have the mysterious light wheels seen in the Indian Ocean, the South China Sea, and the Persian Gulf. Also known as the wheels of Poseidon, light wheels are a strange phenomenon in which massive blooms of light illuminate the ocean around a vessel in a circular formation that mimic the spokes of a wheel. While the light itself is pretty easily explainable, bioluminescence, living organisms that emit light through chemical reactions when the water around them becomes agitated, the shape formed by the bioluminescence is incredibly perplexing. Because of this, these wheels have become known as the crop circles of the ocean, and many theories including underwater electromagnetic activities and even alien influence have arisen as a result. Next up, I want to take a moment to talk about all of the wonderful, beautiful, incredibly deadly animals that are lucky enough to call the ocean home. Animals like the Portuguese man-o'-war, the blue-ringed octopus, the cone snail, the Australian box jellyfish, and the stonefish, along with so many others. If you want to die a slow and painful death, these creatures are the companions for you. The Portuguese man-o'-war is highly toxic and it floats on the surface of the water, making it incredibly easy to come into contact with. Just brushing up against the tentacles of this thing causes intense burning sensations, pain, paresthesia, and even death. The cone snail, while tiny, is also incredibly deadly, loaded with toxins that cause damage to nerve receptors, leading to extreme pain, muscle paralysis, blurred vision, respiratory paralysis, and of course, death. Blue-ringed octopus, small, poisonous, deadly. Its toxins make your muscles unable to contract, leaving your heart unable to pump blood. The Australian box jellyfish can kill you in 5 minutes, and of course the stonefish, which impales you with its sharp dorsal fins before releasing an incredibly powerful toxin into your bloodstream that causes skeletal and muscle paralysis, seizures, convulsion, respiratory arrest, damage to the cardiovascular system, and of course, drumroll please, death exists in the ocean as well. So can't blame them. That's some pretty scary stuff. Next up, we have the fact that the ocean contains deadly underwater lakes, aka brine pools. At the bottom of the Red Sea, at a depth of around 1,770 meters, scientists discovered something strange. A brine pool, which is made up of highly concentrated seawater roughly 3 to 8 times saltier than the surrounding ocean. It looks like a pond sitting at the bottom of the sea floor. Super cool to look at, also super deadly to enter. You see, brine pools, believe it or not, contain a lethal amount of saline, salt, which replaces the oxygen content in the water. Brine pools also contain poisonous chemicals, including hydrogen sulfide. While there are some microbes that can survive brine pools, fish, crabs, eels, and humans cannot. And brine pools aren't exclusive to the Red Sea either. The Jacuzzi of Despair is another that scientists have discovered, and this one resides in the Gulf of Mexico. It has a circumference of about 100 feet and it reaches a depth of about 12 feet. Like other brine pools, its water is so dense it refuses to mix with its surroundings, and if you enter it, you will most likely die. Next up, we've got the radioactive waters of the Irish Sea, English Channel, and the Arctic Ocean, as well as the Kara Sea and the Barents Sea. You see, for years, radioactive waste has been improperly disposed of into some of the world's largest bodies of water. A British nuclear fuels plant is responsible for raising the radiation levels of the Irish Sea after repeatedly releasing radioactive waste into its waters. Similarly, a French nuclear reprocessing plant released copious amounts of waste into the English Channel. And if you think that's bad, for decades it has been reported that Russia has been dumping large quantities of radioactive materials into the Arctic Ocean as well as the Kara and Barents Sea. All of this has caused an increase in the radioactivity of not only seawater, but sea life as well. I really don't blame NASA for wanting to keep their lead scientists out of waters contaminated with radioactive materials known to cause fatigue, hair loss, memory loss, concentration problems, nausea, vomiting, headaches, blurry vision, and of course cancer. Next up, we have the fact that our oceans are absolutely littered with dead bodies. In the United States States alone, approximately 4,400 unidentified bodies are found in the ocean each year. And globally, that number is around 260,000. And these are just the ones that we found that we were unable to identify, meaning that the actual number of bodies floating around or slowly decomposing beneath the surface of the oceans is way more than that, which is both terrifying and disgusting, and also a good reason for anyone to decide not to step foot in the ocean. Personally, there is no way I would give up snorkeling just because of a few bodies floating around in the deep ocean, but if I actually saw one wash up on the shore, I might be inclined to change my mind. So I don't blame you, NASA. Next, we've got those unidentified sounds of the ocean, specifically the Julia and the bloop. The Julia was a noise recorded on March 1st of 1999 by the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and it sounds like this. Scientists have speculated that the sound was a result of an iceberg either breaking or smashing into another. The true origin of the Julia does remain unknown. And then of course there's also the bloop, another strange sound recorded in the ocean, this time in 1997, and the bloop sounds like this. Like the Julia, scientists believe that the bloop is the sound of an iceberg, probably breaking in half, which is probable, but it's still just speculation, and considering the fact that there have been numerous other sounds recorded by scientists that have been unable to be attributed to anything, let alone icebergs, who's to say the bloop and the Julia aren't the sounds of two giant underwater monsters communicating with one another or asserting dominance to an aquatic challenger? Next up, we've got the possibility that NASA decided to step away from exploring the ocean once they realized our planet was irreversibly doomed. I mean, maybe they have bigger fish to fry than figuring out what kind of big fish reside at the bottom of the ocean. It is possible that they are actively working towards ensuring the future of humanity as we know it, whether that future takes place on Earth or on a distant planet in a faraway galaxy. For all we know, the race to find the next inhabitable planet could already be well underway, and if it is, I guarantee NASA and the United States are working overtime to be the first. We all know how they like to get their flag in there first. And maybe they're doing this because of the fact that there are comets set to collide with the Earth in the next 2,000 years, or perhaps it's the fact that scientists are very well aware that eventually our home galaxy of the Milky Way will be getting swallowed up by our neighboring galaxy, the Andromeda. I don't know, I guess maybe they're looking at the big picture, pulling an Elon Musk, if you will. And then of course there is the theory that NASA is still very much exploring our oceans, but are doing their absolute best to keep things happening under the water, under the radar of the public. As I mentioned in part 1 of this video, many people believe that NASA has made many more discoveries than they have actually shared with us. Underwater cities and societies, gigantic megafauna, and even alien life forms are all possible reasons they might want to keep their findings a secret from the general public. That is, until they figure out their next steps. Speculations surrounding underwater facilities used to study unknown phenomena and massive underwater cages housing the world's largest sea creature, aka the Megalodon, have been circulating the internet for ages. It's possible that an Aquatic Area 51 studying unidentified aquatic phenomena exists, and that one day the Pentagon will declassify those documents the way they declassify documents pertaining to peculiar happenings in our atmosphere such as UAPs and UFOs. Only time will tell.
Now, resources. They're what human beings have been fighting over since the dawn of time. Resources mean life or death, and in space travel, water, food, and oxygen are limited. It's one of the main reasons why prolonged space travel has been so tough to figure out. One of the biggest fears is running out of oxygen. Spacecraft rely on complex life support systems to generate oxygen from water, but any malfunction could lead to a shortage. And the thought of being stranded in the black void of space, slowly running out of air, knowing there's no way help can reach you in time, is pretty terrifying. Astronauts also need water, not just for drinking, also for cooking and hygiene. In space, water has to be carefully recycled from every possible source, including urine and sweat. Yes, sending water up into space is expensive, as is, so astronauts on the ISS are already working with a short supply, so imagine being out deep into space. The fear here is that any failure in the recycling system could deplete the water supply, and then of course, we have food. Gotta make sure there's enough food to last the entire journey. Space food is specifically prepared to stay edible for long periods, but if supplies were to somehow run out or become contaminated, they'd be screwed. And again, this is more manageable on the ISS, so close to Earth, but if a manned crew was deep out into space, a resupply would of course take a much longer time to reach them. There have even been situations on the International Space Station where there have been delays that have happened with supplies of food and water. Rockets have been sent up from Earth, but stuff's gone wrong and supplies have been delayed getting there. It can be a real issue. Alright, in shows like Star Trek, it always seems like space is just this empty void. You can just fly through no problem until you come in contact with another ship or a planet, but things wouldn't be quite as smooth sailing in real life. Space is full of debris. You have micrometeoroids, for example, which are tiny particles of rock or metal that travel through space at extremely high speeds, and even though they're small, they can cause serious damage if they collide with a spacecraft or spacesuit. Imagine traveling millions of miles from Earth, knowing that at any moment a tiny invisible particle could just puncture the hull of your ship. Even closer to Earth, we have leftover pieces of old satellites and discarded rocket parts and stuff. Most of it is still orbiting around Earth, and there have been situations where stuff has crashed into the International Space Station. Unlike larger objects that can be tracked and avoided, smaller threats are harder to detect and can hit without warning. And forget the ship, what if a spacesuit is punctured during a spacewalk? NASA does use shielding to help protect against debris, but it's impossible to eliminate the risk altogether. One of the biggest dangers to human health is extreme temperatures, and space can be extremely cold or intensely hot, with no atmosphere to moderate the temperature. Objects in space can experience temperatures from hundreds of degrees below zero to hundreds of degrees above, depending on their exposure to the sun. In deep space, when an object is in direct sunlight, it can get incredibly hot, but in the shadow of a planet or when the sun is blocked, temperatures can plummet. And this drastic difference in temperature can happen really quickly, which can be a big problem for both astronauts and their equipment. For astronauts, it's spacewalks where this can be the most dangerous. Spacesuits are designed to protect against fluctuations in temperature, but any malfunction or damage to the suit and you could suffer from hyperthermia or hypothermia. And for the spacecraft, well, temperature changes cause things to expand and contract. So if we did happen to be on a massive journey deep into space, who knows what the constant expansion and contraction would do to the ship over time. Another concern is gravitational anomalies, regions of space with unexpected gravitational forces that could trap a spacecraft in a dangerous zone. Space is unpredictable. The idea of encountering regions where the gravitational pull is stronger or weaker than anticipated is a real concern. This could cause the ship to veer off course, or worse, it could get caught in a gravitational trap, almost like a whirlpool, like just stuck in orbit, leaving everyone stranded, floating in orbit until all the food and water runs out. Very scary thought. Another dangerous aspect of space travel is the exposure to harmful radiation. Not sure if you're aware of this, but human beings aren't really built for flying through space. We, as well as everything else on this planet, is perfectly suited for Earth. The atmosphere and magnetic field protect us from harmful cosmic and solar radiation, but in space, there is no protection. Astronauts are constantly bombarded by high energy particles, and radiation exposure can cause immediate and long-term health issues. There's a chance of radiation sickness, which causes nausea, vomiting, and fatigue, which sucks on its own, but it can also impair an astronaut's ability to perform tasks. And in space, where one wrong move can spell disaster, that's a bit of a problem. Long-term exposure is even more concerning. Over time, radiation can damage DNA, increasing the risk of cancers or even genetic mutations. The possibility of developing cancer years after a mission is a risk astronauts decide to take on. It's not just an astronaut's health radiation can affect, though, but their equipment as well. Radiation can interfere with the electronics on a spacecraft, causing malfunctions. This would be especially dangerous in deep space, where help would be far away and repairs would have to be made with whatever resources the crew would have on hand. Malfunction in navigation, communication, or, heaven forbid, life support systems would be catastrophic. Now, NASA spacecrafts are designed with shielding to protect against radiation and limit the time astronauts spend in space to reduce exposure, but no matter how much we prepare, the dangers of radiation in deep space are always a threat because things won't always go as planned. And solar flares could make things even worse. Sudden bursts of radiation from the sun can be difficult to predict. Sleep is just as essential to us as food and water, and sleep can be a bit of a problem in space. We've evolved here on Earth with a day and night cycle. It's built into our bodies to be awake during the day and asleep at night. And when that sleep cycle gets messed up, we get messed up. If you've ever spent all day at school and then worked all through the night, you know how detrimental it is to your physical and mental health over time, and it really doesn't take that long. In space, where there's no natural day and night cycle, astronauts can struggle to keep up with a healthy sleep pattern. I mean, the lights are always on, and there's no real sense of time passing, not to mention they sleep upright. The disruption to the body's internal clock can lead to insomnia, fatigue, irritability, or worse. And on top of that, you have the other effects of space travel, like muscle atrophy, and poor sleep can just make this even worse. Then your immune system is weakened, making you more susceptible to illness. So yeah, long duration missions are a big risk. An obvious danger of exploring the far reaches of space is, of course, encountering other life forms. It would be cool, or at least it could be. It could also be an absolute worst case scenario. With billions of galaxies and potentially trillions of planets, the possibility of encountering extraterrestrial life, whether intelligent or not, is a fun idea. But what could these life forms be like? How might they interact with us? We often picture highly advanced and intelligent aliens bent on world domination, like in War of the Worlds, but the motivations of a potential extraterrestrial species are completely unknown. Even unintelligent life forms could be dangerous. Maybe they'd be hostile in a wild animal kind of way. And even if they weren't, another concern is the potential for biological contamination, beings that carry viruses or illnesses that we have no way of dealing with. If astronauts came in contact with alien microbes or organisms, there is a risk that these life forms could, hitch a ride with us back to Earth and then cause even more problems. Being millions or even billions of miles away from Earth means complete isolation, aside from the other astronauts on your crew. Isolation and the psychological impact of it has to be one of the most daunting things about deep space travel. Not only is there no immediate help for emergencies, but the extreme isolation can take a pretty heavy toll on an astronaut's mental health. I mean, this is already something that's known to happen. And if we were to start traveling deeper and deeper into the abyss, this would become an even bigger issue. To be confined in a small spacecraft for months or even potentially years with only a few other people for company, the sense of loneliness can be overwhelming. Communication with Earth would be delayed and limited, and the monotony of space travel would also just be mentally exhausting. Seeing the same small group of idiots in the same environment well, they're not idiots, they're astronauts for God's sakes, but you start to feel like they're idiots, I imagine, after a while. Everyone gets on your nerves eventually. And, no option to step outside for a breath of fresh air, or just to change the scenery. It's just black, and then stars, and then gotta be incredibly claustrophobic. Now, astronauts know what they're getting into, and they train for this, of course, but can any amount of training really prepare you for potentially spending years out there? The fear of the unknown is one of humanity's greatest fears, and we know basically nothing about what is truly out there in the far reaches of space. Look at how many ships have met tragic ends exploring the ocean. The dangerous storms, the wildlife, the treacherous currents. Who the hell knows what horrors are out in space? We can predict some of the dangers we could face in space, like on this list, but there is still stuff that's unexplained. Bursts of energy, anomalies in space-time, unidentified objects of some kind. Stuff we just can't fully explain or even comprehend. Stuff we can never prepare for before we come face to face with it. And unfortunately, the first ones to find out likely won't make it home to tell the tale. Here's a scary idea. NASA has been avoiding spending all their time, their money, and resources on space exploration because there's something deadly heading our way. Something like a big, huge asteroid. And they've been secretly putting all their time and effort into developing technology to destroy it. Not a fun thing to imagine, but I suppose it is possible. I mean, it would make sense, right? Defending the planet from a world-ending asteroid would be the #1 priority. And as for hiding the info from the public, well, I mean, why make everyone panic? There's really nothing we'd be able to do if a massive asteroid was gonna crash into the planet. I mean, what's the plan? Send people into their underground bunkers that almost none of us actually have? So NASA alludes to all these missions they're planning on doing in the near future just to make it seem like they're busy setting out to explore space, when in reality, they're spending their days frantically running around working on some big, highly advanced asteroid vaporizing laser technology. I mean, dear God, I hope that is not the case, but who knows, right?
Next, we're talking about space weather events. I have to be honest with you. The sun is kind of terrifying. Space is like a wild, untamed frontier where the sun isn't just a bright ball in the sky, but actually a fiery powerhouse that is constantly throwing tantrums. These tantrums are more commonly known as solar flares and coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, and they have the potential to wreak havoc on anything in their path, including us here on Earth, but also definitely to any spacecraft and the astronauts on board them. Solar flares are sudden explosive bursts of energy that send out a flurry of radiation and charged particles, and they can be powerful enough to completely fry the delicate electronics on board a spacecraft, and they can also cause major issues to their communication systems on both satellites and spacecraft, which is terrifying for obvious reasons. Imagine a spaceflight losing contact with Houston. CME, on the other hand, is a massive bubble of hot gas and magnetic fields erupting from the surface of the sun and racing through space like a space tsunami. When a CME hits Earth, it can cause us to have geomagnetic storms that affect our planet's magnetic fields. Remember all those lovely auroras we had a couple weeks ago? Yeah, maybe not quite as lovely as we maybe thought. CMEs can mess with power grids, satellites, and other important technological infrastructure that we rely on. For astronauts out there in space, these solar events are more than just a light show. We are protected here on Earth by our wonderful atmosphere that keeps us safe. Thank you, atmosphere. But astronauts would be at risk of getting exposed to high amounts of radiation from these storms, and with the exposure to radiation comes a whole slew of potential health issues. Who would have thought that we would need to fear one of the things that we also need to survive? This is all to say that this is why scientists and engineers work tirelessly to understand these solar tantrums and develop technologies to protect our astronauts and spacecraft from their fiery fury.
Politics play a huge role in space missions, especially manned ones. One of the biggest reasons we haven't seen as many manned missions to space as science fiction movies would have predicted back in the day is that politics just get in the way. So first off, the priorities of the US government change with each new president. One president might want to focus on sending astronauts to Mars, while another might prefer returning to the moon. Now, these shifts can delay or change planned missions. Money is another big issue, of course. If the government decides to spend money on other stuff, NASA just might not get enough funding for its missions. But geopolitics is a big one, especially with projects like the International Space Station. So political tensions between countries, especially the US and Russia, of course, can really complicate things and delay missions. I mean, just a few years ago, Russia accused NASA astronauts of tampering with the ISS and drilling a hole in it. Kind of a wild story, and I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more coverage. But anyway, of course, there's also the competition aspect with other countries. Competition can be good, can force countries to innovate and get more ambitious, but it can also lead to a lot of secrecy and less cooperation.
Imagine landing on a pristine alien world all set to explore its mysterious terrain. You step out of your spacecraft, eager to take that historic first step. But wait, did you just unwittingly unleash a microbial invasion? When we send spacecraft to other worlds, they're not exactly traveling light. They're loaded up with all sorts of gear and gadgets, and sometimes they're carrying a few stowaways. These microscopic passengers might seem harmless to us, but on a planet or moon where life has never existed, they could cause some serious trouble. Those Earth microbes, accustomed to our cozy home planet, might start wreaking havoc on this new environment, disrupting delicate ecosystems and throwing the whole place out of whack. But it's not just about protecting other worlds from us, there's also the risk of bringing something back home that we definitely don't want. Think about it. If we stumble upon alien microbes during our space travels, who's to say that they won't cause trouble when they hitch a ride back to Earth? We're talking about potential pandemics of extraterrestrial origin, a sci-fi nightmare come true. That's why planetary protection is such a big deal. It's all about making sure we play nice with our cosmic neighbors and keep our own backyard safe from unwanted interstellar visitors.
Now, NASA could be taking funds meant for public missions and secretly using them for other undisclosed projects. Imagine, NASA gets funding from the government to develop a new spacecraft for a mission to Mars, for example, but instead of using all that money for the spacecraft, some of it is quietly redirected to a secret project, like a classified satellite, for example, or some other covert mission. Now, why exactly would NASA do this? There are a few theories. One is that NASA might be working on projects related to national security that they can't really talk about publicly. So they might be working on military satellites, spy technology, or other quote-unquote defense projects. And because these projects are secret, they can't be listed in the public budget. Another reason could be that NASA is exploring something they don't want the public to know about yet, like the whole asteroid thing I brought up earlier, but there are tons of other possibilities. So by diverting those funds, they can quietly make progress without attracting too much attention.
If anything is going to throw the ultimate wrench in the plans of a spacefaring astronaut, it's gonna be a black hole. These space beasts are like the ultimate vacuum. They suck in everything, including light, with their extremely powerful gravitational pull. This, of course, means that navigating around these suckers would be no easy feat. If this wasn't already enough, let's add on to the fact that not all black holes are exceptionally predictable. Passing by a black hole could have a spacecraft very easily careening off course before anyone could even tell Houston that there was a problem. Plus, if you get too close, not only are you not escaping that gravitational pull, but the tidal forces will soon turn you into human spaghetti, which, while very interesting, is probably not the goal of the space mission. So while black holes make some fascinating study material, they are best viewed from as far away as humanly possible.
Now, the first successful mission to the moon happened in 1969. You'd think by now we would have at the very least landed on Mars, so why haven't we? Well, aside from budgetary restraints and all that stuff, there are a lot of negative effects prolonged time in space can have on the human body, and there are possible long-term effects that we may not even fully understand yet. If we had the type of technology in, say, Star Trek, allowing the ships to replicate the gravity that we have here on Earth, things would be a lot easier, but as it is now, that's just not the case, so a long trip to Mars and back just really isn't on the table at the moment. One major issue is muscle and bone loss. Without gravity, your muscles and bones don't have to work as hard, which can lead to muscle atrophy, similar to what happens to people who are bedridden for long periods of time. On Earth, gravity also pulls all your bodily fluids down towards your feet. In space, though, without gravity, these fluids move up to your head. So aside from causing like a puffy face, there's also increased pressure in the skull, which doesn't sound very fun. There are even some studies that have shown being in space can weaken the immune system. So there's a lot of challenges here we just don't currently have the technology to deal with. And lastly, we have the obvious. Manned space missions are just plain dangerous. I'm focusing mostly on moon landings here because people will often question why NASA hasn't been back to the moon since 1972, and there are plenty of reasons, danger being one of them. Now, NASA is saying we'll have another crewed mission to the moon in 2026 as part of the Artemis project. Fingers crossed that does happen. But as for why we don't have a moon base already, like youngsters in the late 60s all thought we would have by now, well, danger. Definitely a factor. Failed space missions date back to the 60s, but even in more recent times, the Challenger disaster in 1986, the Columbia disaster in 2003, it's just hard to get out into space and not die. We haven't mastered the technology yet like we have with planes. Now, if something goes wrong during takeoff, landing, or while out in orbit, it's just hard to correct, and the probability of death is high.
In our number 10 spot, we have it's a death trap. An unsettling reason for not returning to the moon would be because it's supposedly a bit of a death trap. Apparently, the moon's surface is littered with craters and boulders that threaten safe landings. Well, yep, that checks out as one of the biggest reasons. Why would we risk all that hard work and money if once we're finally there, the craters on the moon are the reason for the project to fail? We should definitely maybe send some moon rovers there to help us figure out that equation first. Apparently, before the first landing, the US government spent billions to develop and launch and deliver satellites to map the surface of the moon, but they still can't predict meteorite impacts that might happen after. So anyways, it's a mission just to plan the landing, and even still, they'll never 100% know that everything will be fine. I can see why they may be hesitant. In our number 9 spot, we have the ending of the Cold War. One of the reasons it is said that we never returned to the moon was because the Cold War ended. Initially, getting to the moon, well, it was a race against Russia. NASA, as we know, won and got to the moon first, but in any case, they still wanted to go back to get a ton of research before Russia. But once the Cold War ended, the tension and competition wasn't as high. Yeah, that makes sense. That to me isn't really a good enough reason to not have gone back to the moon in, the last 50 years. But I could definitely see it being a motivating factor for not needing to go back as quickly. In our number 8 spot, we have theoretical benefits. Allegedly, the benefits of going back to the moon are largely theoretical. Of course, scientists believe that potential research would be a key reason to go back, but it doesn't seem to be a good enough reason. Apparently, this isn't a practical reason, and the risks would be too high for such an adventure to occur. If the moon were to eventually be used as a refueling place for larger expeditions, then that's a different story. But as it is, there isn't a good enough reason to return, and the government doesn't want to throw away billions on the possibility of benefits. Makes sense. In our number 7 spot, we have low funds. This one is probably one of the biggest and most likely reasons. Funds. Not that NASA doesn't already have a ton of funds for research purposes, but imagine how much more they would need to get to the moon again. They would have to build a whole new rocket, which I don't know how many employees that will take, plus you have to pay the astronauts a ton, plus all the mathematical scientists that plan the trip and whatever they do. I don't work at NASA, okay, so I have no idea how many employees this expedition would require, but my point is that a lot of time will be needed and therefore a lot of moolah. Probably one of the biggest reasons why the presidents aren't backing another landing because of how much money from people's taxes it will require. But it is curious why only approximately 0.4% of the US federal budget gets given to NASA these days, when back in the 60s, NASA was receiving around 4%. So anyways, this low budget reasoning makes sense, especially if NASA can't show a clear profit margin from doing the trip. The government is not going to want to contribute to this. In our number 6 spot, we have aliens reside on the moon. This is a fun theory, and one that China almost thought to be true with their U-2 moon rover discovered a mystery hut on the moon earlier this year. It turned out to be a rock on a crater rim, which truly made me laugh out loud. But still guys, who knows, it might be possible. Why not? We can't be the only living creatures in the universe. Also, anyone remember Neil Armstrong apparently commented on seeing big, enormous creatures on the moon? Even though he denies it, NASA employees confirmed that they heard him talk about them, so it's very possible that we aren't returning to the moon because of the enormous moon aliens. Who knows? In our number 5 spot, we have aliens on Earth. This is another fun theory as, hey, we all don't know what's happening in Area 51 and all the underground secret bases of the world, so maybe there are aliens on Earth persuading us to not go back to the moon. There have been many reports of the gray people in the underground bases, and then of course the reptile people are a popular point of discussion. So who knows? Perhaps us humans aren't just humans anymore living on this planet. Perhaps there are shapeshifters around us telling us to not focus on the moon for whatever reason. Could be because they are from it. In our number 4 spot, we have billionaires might go there anyway. One of the reasons NASA might be holding off on returning to the moon could be because billionaires like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos might be going there anyways. Why bother wasting money on a trip if we could ask the billionaires funding their own trip to let us, tag along for research reasons? I'm sure NASA could buy a seat on their spaceship. It's probably more affordable than spending the money to build their own ship and pay their own employees. Makes sense to me. In our number 3 spot, we never went in the first place. Well, obviously this is a popular one in the online forum chat rooms. The infamous debate. Did we even go to the moon ever? Or was it filmed in a Hollywood studio? Well, look, I guess it could be possible. They could have a Hollywood-style studio in Area 51 where they filmed it, and then none of the employees would say anything because they've already sworn to secrecy anyway. Or perhaps their memories could have been wiped and they wouldn't remember anyway. This would be quite unsettling if true, but I honestly don't think we'll ever know for sure. I wish I could go to NASA, watch the astronauts get in the spaceship, watch it take off, and then watch it land days or weeks later. Then I would be 100% convinced. If you know someone who has done this, please share your experience in the comment section below and make all the non-believers believe. In our number 2 spot, we have slim pickings. An issue that NASA in particular might be dealing with that is a little unsettling is the lack of young people interested in the idea of being an astronaut or scientist these days. Apparently astronauts say that American kids were polled and they say that they dream more about becoming YouTube stars rather than astronauts, and that's a big problem for NASA. Not to mention that we now live in a society of kids that want the quick fix success route and don't know the value of working hard. Apparently the average person that works at NASA's Johnson Space Center is closer to 60 years old. Yikes. NASA astronaut Rusty Schweickart was quoted as saying, "That's not where innovation and excitement comes from. Excitement comes from when you've got teenagers and 20-year-olds running programs. When Elon Musk lands a rocket booster, his whole company is yelling and screaming and jumping up and down." Honestly, it makes sense. Young people aren't, worn out yet and still see life in so much color, and that is what is required for new creative ideas to flow.